This fucking loser? This guy is such a fucking loser. I can't believe he's still around. Jesus Christ.
All right, everyone, warm up those brains. It's time once again for the Get More Smarter podcast. This one here is episode 237. I'm Jason Bain.
I'm Ian Silveri. This week on the Get More Smarter podcast, the 2025 legislative session has adjourned Sine Die, which is Latin for a lot of things that happened this year that make us want to die. Next, we check in with the Trump Trainwreck as tariffs, trust, and traitors start to weigh heavy on the regime. Then, Colorado's future one-term congressman from the 8th Congressional District is writing his own ticket back home. Don't say we didn't tell you so. But first, let's unpack the legislative session that just ended with Denver Post Statehouse reporter Seth Klamann. You're not going to want to miss this interview. Take a listen. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Seth Klamann, Statehouse reporter for the Denver Post. Seth joined the Denver Post politics team in 2022, covering the Statehouse policy and elections. A proud Kansas City native and University of Missouri grad, go Mizzou. He previously worked for the Colorado Springs Gazette, the Casper Star Tribune, and the Omaha World Herald. Outside of work, he enjoys watching soccer, going on road trips, trolling me via text message, and eating fried food. Seth Klamann, welcome to the Get More Smarter podcast.
Hello. I'm sorry I stepped on your intro there. I said hi too early. Hello.
We'll cut it out. It'll be like it never happened.
Before we get started, I think you and I have talked about this before, but as a Kansas City native, Gates or Arthur Bryant's barbecue?
They're kind of equal in my head. Maybe this is heretical for people in Kansas City. They're kind of on a similar level. I love Q39. I grew up like near the plaza for people who know Kansas City, and Q39 is like a few blocks away. And then when I'm feeling fancy, and by that I mean when my parents are paying, I'm a big fan of Jack Stack. Jack Stack is really good, but it is like the bougie barbecue, so giving myself away a little bit, but my little brother loves Gates. Every time my little brother's in town, we always go to Gates. So maybe
wait a second. Can we like quickly do a Colorado best barbecue then, if we're gonna alienate 95% of our audience to begin with?
Yeah,
I have thoughts. Yeah, no, nothing.
Not
Smoke in the source is very, very good.
That is true, and it's Kansas City style. They have Kansas City shit like all over their walls. Yeah, so
that's right.
Do they yell at you when you come in?
Like, no, just to say hi, thanks for being here. As far as is that part of the vibe in Kansas City barbecue? What the fuck are you doing in this restaurant?
It's Gates. They just as soon as you walk in the door, they say, "Hi, may I help you?" And it's really loud. You're like, "Ah."
Really
they don't fuck around. Get after it. Come on.
All right. Well, we're here to talk to you about the 2025 legislative session that just adjourned Sine Die or Sine Die, depending on how good your Latin is. And we're grateful to have you because you had a front row seat to a lot of this. So, Jason, I think you have our first.
Yeah,
question.
let's start with the big view. What's the headline takeaway for you from your perspective of this session?
I'm gonna. Well, first, everyone pause the video and go to denverpost.com and read my colleague Nick Coltrane and I's story about this. So, I mean, I sort of, as we were thinking about the end of session, I kind of broke it down to like three kind of really, so I'm going to take your answer or question for one and give you three instead. I think there were three kind of big dynamics that were driving it. Our story had a fourth, but that was sort of a policy thing. So I think one was Trump, right? I think like there actually wasn't a lot of like Trump reactivity, like Trump tweeted something or there was an executive order and then everyone scrambled. There was more like sort of proactive defense building from the Dems, I think. The biggest, clearest example of this is the $4 million defense fund that they set up, right? But they had some bills related to the ACA getting undercut, the Colorado Voting Rights Act, which in case the VRA gets gutted even more. There was an immigration bill, a couple of big transgender rights bills. So Trump, I think, was a big one, just sort of trying to shore up kind of defenses, right? And part of that, I think, leads into the second one. There was no money, right? There was no money this year.
There was negative money.
There was negative money, right? So as a consequence, right, they're not able to do these kind of like big sweeping things. Like land use they spent a lot of money on land use. There's tax credits and incentives in there. They couldn't do that kind of thing this year. So the budget acted as sort of a natural check, and so instead you kind of got these more. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but like value statements, right? And I think that both the transgender bill and the immigration bill are examples of that. Not that those weren't bills that were really important to those communities, right, and really important to the legislators running them. But simultaneously, it was also like this is something in sort of the age of Trump that we feel we need to do to sort of plant a flag. So I think the budget was another big one because there was just no money, right, and that kind of cast a pall over everything. And now next year is going to be even worse. They're probably going to be back in September for a special session to deal with federal funding cuts. And then the third thing is kind of polis bucking. I think that's something that most of the press corps picked up. I know the Sun and one of their takeaways was the same. But Polis has got 18 months left. So there was, in my 3 years plus at the legislature, there's always griping about Polis, right? He's always pretty intimately involved in lawmaking. And I think now that people can see the horizon for him and he's taken a sort of different tact on Trump than a lot of the legislature, I think that led to more bucking. I mean, you saw that there were 2 veto overrides, one that actually happened and one that didn't happen. They, like on the last day, they even rejected some of his Judicial Discipline Commission nominees. One of them, they passed bills he didn't want them to pass, SB 5, the big labor bill. They were ready to roll him on SB 3, the semi-automatic weapon permit to purchase scheme, until a senator didn't show up. But had Hawkins Lewis been there, they would have rolled him on that. So I think those were this is a long answer, but those are the big 3, I think: budget, Polis bucking, and then the sort of shadow of Trump and Trump defensiveness.
We'll get into more of these details in a minute, but I also want to ask you, from what you hear and what each political party is telling you, what do Democrats say the headlines are? What do Republicans say the headlines are?
So we had all the press avails with everybody yesterday, right, where they gave us their official lines. And I can imagine the comms guy for the House Dems walking by us and saying this every day for the last week. But their kind of easy word was a productive session, right? They tried to do stuff on affordability, both because that's kind of top of mind for Colorado voters, and I think was a takeaway from the 24 election, right, is like the economy. Right. So I think they would say, the Dems would say, we did stuff on affordability. We did things on civil rights, right? The immigration bill, the Voting Rights Act, trans bill again. So that was a big one. I think Polis got asked yesterday by 9 News about, are you a lame duck? And he kind of sidestepped it, but said, I got 3 of my 4 housing things done. So they got single stair done. I will never use smart stair, which is the Gov's messaging, but single
smart stair, like an escalator.
Right.
Is that a smart stair?
Right, exactly. It's like Bluetooth enabled stairs. I refuse, with all due respect to the Gov's housing folks.
I don't get single stair either, though. In fairness, is it just one step?
It's like it was like a barrier to building apartment buildings, right? Because you needed to have 2 staircases, and that would like make building a lot of them hard. So now you just have to have one. Is that basically it?
Basically, yeah. And it's really like an infill. Like if you think of like little lots in the middle of a city or whatever, if you have to have 2 double barrel stairwells on either side, think of like a hotel, then one, that's space. That's hard to build like 5 stories in those little spaces, and it's more expensive. If you want to get more like, I don't know, esoteric with it, there's arguments that, this creates different ways of living, because then you're all built around one stairwell, and so then your apartments open facing each other, and you have a communal space of the stairwell. Anyway, so the Gov was trying to kind of put on a positive face on the housing agenda. They got some housing stuff done, but so the Dems were saying productive session. We responded to Trump. We tried to do what we could on affordability. On the budget, we didn't cut Medicaid. We didn't cut schools. We slapped Band-Aids on, and we're okay. The Republicans, their big push yesterday was affordability sucks. We didn't do anything on affordability. We had all these proposals to improve affordability, get rid of fees, and the Dems killed them.
It's like Paul Lundeen's big stack of weird dollar bills from the beginning of session.
Yeah, they shredded all of those. They shredded them. I'm serious. I was trying to decide like if that was a clever visual or not. But so we had the press avail with them yesterday, and I have a lot of respect for the Senate Republicans too. But they had literally shredded this. They had a stack, right, in like a tube sort of shape.
Yeah.
It was just in like an aquarium of shredded $1 bills yesterday. So that was.
I would have just given that to charity, but whatever.
That's very weird.
But then they kind of took some wins, right? There was a resolution that Reps Camacho and Garcia had drafted to try and undo Tabor via lawsuit. That never met the floor, and the Republicans took some credit for that, which is probably fair to a degree. The 1312, the transgender bill, was much different when it was passed than when it was introed, and they took some credit for that, probably rightfully so. Although there was, that had a lot of fathers, I think. So I think the Republicans sort of took umbrage on not more being done on affordability, had some beef with like the gun bill passing, the big gun bill, and then kind of took the wins where they thought they had found them. And I think too, that it's weird because the Republicans are in near super minority in both House and Senate right here, but then nationally they had an ascendant 2024 election. So I think both parties were sort of in a weird position where the rest of the country was moving in a way, even though we're in our own weird little political bubble here.
So thanks for that. And then real quick, what was the fourth dynamic that you put in your headline but aren't talking about here?
Affordability. And the reason and not that wasn't like an important thing. I didn't mean to like undercut it, but just like that I don't think was a driver. I think that was a big policy push from both parties, which is why we put it in our takeaways. But I don't think that was like something that was driving the session along as much as those other three.
It's also not unique to this session. We've been talking about costs for years now, whereas those other things are kind of new dynamics. So I get that. We have this designation on the show we call sneaky genius bills. Every year there's a couple bills that kind of like fly under the radar a little bit, but then like are going to like make a big difference, either positively or negatively, depending on how you look at it. Is there any legislation that was sort of surprisingly impactful, but may have appeared boring or got less coverage than maybe it deserved that hit your radar screen?
Yeah, I mean, I'll cape for the Gov's office briefly. We did this end of session avail yesterday, and they rolled it into a bill signing and signed a bill to standardize modular housing building codes, which is like a ridiculously dry sentence. But but like housing policy is like super interesting, but it's kind of sucks to talk about with normies because like it doesn't, like land use and setbacks, and it means nothing. But I was talking with the AP's reporter about it after, and he was like really jazzed about this bill, and he thought it was the most impactful bill of the session, right? Because modular housing is sort of a big part of supply building, right? And so I'll give a shout out to them and to Jesse Bedane from the AP on that one because I think that's probably right.
What does that mean for the non housing nerds listening?
So I mean, I paid very little attention to this bill, to be totally honest. Mostly
for aforementioned reasons.
Going on, right. I mean, I am a housing nerd, but I kind of took a break from housing this session. I mean, there's my understanding of it, and this may be such a muddled thing that it's not even worth getting into, but like modular housing is like factory built housing, right? And if you have standard building codes for an entire region, then the builders can know, okay, I can build, if I build this to certain specs, then it can go anywhere, and I don't need to, Westminster doesn't have one and Denver has another or whatever. I'm absolutely going to have to fact check to make sure I explain that correctly, and because otherwise
that makes
sense. From the Cubs office will text me. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. That I appreciate that. Next question is like, so you said this, Democrats are in near supermajorities in both chambers. Republicans, therefore, we call them mini minorities in both chambers, are not super minorities, are not micro minorities like they used to be. They're mini minorities. Were there any unexpected alliances or even divisions that you saw among lawmakers that had an impact on the actual legislating this session?
Yeah, I mean, certainly this isn't a new thing, but it's something I track really closely. I mean, the level of Dem infighting, right? I think you can see not like it's not like there's knife fighting in the streets or whatever, but like a relatively clean break in some parts on some policies between sort of more moderate, put a hyphen there because some of them, have lefty creds too, more moderate versus the more progressive wings, right? I mean, you saw, I wrote a story about this in March or April, but there were a handful of bills where this came out, pretty acutely. There was the earned wage access bill, which sort of a payday loan. Majority Leader Duran, I'm sure, disagrees firmly with that, but that was the criticism of it. Trying to regulate that in a way that
companies like Chime, I think, is one of them that have these sort of like cards where you can get paid early, and maybe you don't have interest to pay it back, but maybe you do if you don't pay it back fast enough, kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it comes out of your paycheck. Yeah. So there was some of the progressive Dems hated that bill because they viewed it as a payday loan, right? And so they worked hard and eventually killed it, and actually had a little bit of Republican help in doing that. I think. No, I'm getting my bills mixed up. There was the tipped worker bill where there's a lot of fighting on that, and Republicans did get in on that because there was some question of local control. The state is coming in and telling municipalities, Denver specifically in this case, hey, we know you have your own minimum wage rules, but we're going to change that. Progressive Dems hated that, Labor hated that, and then they had some Republican buy-in for part of that too, which
this bill would have allowed to essentially local governments at the end of it when it was signed. It was introduced differently, but at the end when the bill was sent to the governor's desk, if I'm not incorrect, correct me if I am, it would have allowed local governments to add in tips to the overall calculation of their minimum wage. So if Denver's is $16 an hour, and you get $12 an hour in tips, you can lower that threshold, not all the way, but to a certain number. Is that basically it?
Yeah, I mean, as it was introduced, it basically so there's a minimum wage and there's a tip minimum wage, which is lower by $3 something. Again, it's been like a few months since I've written about it. Now it's all out of my brain. But the argument from restaurants is like, because of in cities like Denver where the minimum wage is higher, the tip minimum wage is also higher.
Right.
And so these employees are making a lot of money, so the restaurants argue, and we restaurants are struggling, so we need to cut this, right? So that eventually got whittled down to just like please local governments do something about it, rather than a direct we are cutting restaurant workers. So there was an interesting sort of left-right alliance on that one. I mean, I'm trying to think of where there might have been some other like left-right alliances. That one really kind of stands out. I mean, it was interesting that there wasn't necessarily an alliance on this one, but the trans bill 1312 had like a lot of concern from the right. Obviously, it's not a surprise. And then some more kind of concern from liberal land too. I mean, One Colorado and some prominent LGBTQ plus groups had concerns about that kind of late, about legal backlash and what its provisions might do. There's a lot to say on how all that happened and why that became such a mess. But I wouldn't say there was an alliance. Like One Colorado wasn't teaming up with Rep. Brandy Bradley on that one, right? But they had sort of paralleled concerns. Maybe that's not even right. They both had concerns that helped contribute to that bill ending up where it was.
Were there any dynamics or anything that happened in this session that really surprised you?
Man, I'm sure. I mean, to talk about SB 5 briefly, I'm surprised that they didn't come to a deal.
The Labor Worker Protection Act.
The Labor Peace Act, yeah. And I guess to explain that really quickly, there's a provision in Colorado law within the Labor Peace Act called the second election. You have to pass one election to have a union, right? And then in Colorado, you have to pass a second election with up to a 75% threshold before you can bargain. That's just negotiate, not have. Negotiate union due collection in your contract, right? Colorado has it. Labor has hated this forever, want it gone. So Polis had said very early back in November, I think, November, December, that he was going to veto this unless business signed off on it. I'm surprised they didn't come to a deal because the second election, with all due respect to labor who hate it, and I understand why they hate it, it's not the biggest thing in the world, right? Like if you balance it against a right to work ballot measure or a just cause ballot measure, it's not existential. I understand why business likes it. I understand why labor abhors it, but it's not a nuclear bomb, right? The just cause ballot measure that unions are now pledging to run is a way bigger deal for businesses. And if you're looking at a 2026 electorate, a Trump blue wave, likely, right? That feels like pretty fertile ground for you. So I'm surprised that they didn't come to a deal.
Are you surprised that business didn't take a deal? Or are you okay? So like, because everyone knows who listens to the show, I'm conflicted on this. I work for the AFL. I wanted this bill to pass. I wanted it to pass cleanly. I think Jason, who doesn't work for the AFL, wants that anyway. And I disagree with some of the things you said, but we don't have to quibble or argue about that. Tell me why because I agree with you politically. I think it was insane for business to walk away, especially considering some of the frameworks of some of the deals that I did hear about. That
it's not going to get
totally
better.
Reasonable. No, so either like Governor Weiser or Governor Bennett sign something pretty similar pretty soon, or something identical, or to your point, the voters in an anti-Trump blue wave in 2026 get rid of the just cause provision, which is something that business uses to fire people more easily, for lack of a deeper explanation. Can you? Is there any insight as to why business didn't take a deal?
I mean, I think I don't have a great answer for you. Some of this is just going to be speculation. So with all due respect to the business folks, I mean, I think partially the fact that the gov came out really early and said, I'm going to veto this unless business is okay with it effectively, then that, what incentive does business have to move a lot? They would, if they were sitting here, they would, counter that they did move. They made 3 counter proposals. They were at the table for some amount of time, and that, I'm not trying to be shitty in that saying some amount of time, but depending on who you talk to, one side walked or the other side walked at some point. So I think that the kind of gov dynamic made it maybe trickier, because then 2 of the 3 parties are saying no, right? And one of those parties has the ability to kill everything. So where's the impetus to negotiate? I think the business community, that's the Chamber of Commerce on one hand. It's also Colorado Concern, which they had a lot of play in the property tax wars last year, right?
These are the CEOs of the bigger companies in the state.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know why, I haven't had a conversation with like Dave Davia, for instance, from Concern, about what broke down here, but I know that just cause is more existential for them from the second election. And I guess it perplexes me why they wouldn't take something relatively easy, and especially with Polis on the way out. I mean, I don't know if labor it looks at Michael Bennett as like a Eugene Debs figure, but like certainly Bennett is gonna have to make statements, as Weiser is gonna have to make statements about where he's gonna stand on labor, and they're gonna ask about this. They're
gonna demand, they'll demand it.
Yeah. So it's not going to get better, to Jason's point. Yeah.
So those were some of the banner issues and some of the banner fights that people heard about and read about a lot during the session. Were there any big behind-the-scenes fights or committee battles that didn't make headlines that may have influenced some of the outcomes here?
I mean, the simple answer is the budget. I mean, the budget made a lot of headlines, but so much of that, shout out to Brian Eason, who lives in the JBC, but like so much of that happens so quietly and is not well understood by even most people in the building. Brian is probably is absolutely the authority in the journalism world. So I that strikes me as a big dynamic. I think some of the kind of fighting and positioning among Democrats, while it wasn't knives in the street, Elizabeth Epson is not in the chamber anymore, so everything is a little quieter on sort of the Dem infighting. There's not as much public as there was a year ago, but I think that played a role. I mean, I think we didn't get into this as much in our story, but there was Sonia Hawkes Lewis resigned over aid issues, which I think was a quietly important part of the session, right? We reported about other aid issues with Rep. Virginia English from the Springs.
Right, and you said on Hawkes Lewis's part that like her absence because of that dynamic actually changed the outcome of the gun bill. So like it's not immaterial to the consequences, right?
100%. Yeah, I think about that all the time. How who knows what would have happened? This is February, I think, but there's a strong argument to be made that SB3, this still pretty sweeping gun policy, would be stronger in the state of Colorado, would be different had Sonia Hawkes Lewis been there that day for the vote, or if she had been resigned, not been in the chamber for another reason before that,
and had the replacement in there who could cast that last vote, right? Like, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we talked a little bit about the Dem infighting being part of the story. I'm curious if there's a similar dynamic among House or Senate Republicans. I kind of want you to unpack this in 4 ways, right? Each party in each chamber. How would you say leadership in both chambers manage those intra-party differences this year? I mean, you kind of have the MAGA contingent in the House, which is much stronger than that in the Senate. Senate Republicans are a little more establishment-y, sort of like old school in some ways. I mean, they seem to like Trump, but they're not Trump-y, if that makes sense. And then in the Democratic caucuses, there is a pretty stark line between the more progressive and less progressive, even though I don't think that is useful in terms of terminology. So I'll stop talking. You unpack this and tell me what you think about those dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the Dems on both sides. It's absolutely a spectrum, right? You have sort of a Shannon Byrd on the most sort of moderate centrist side in the Dems, and then Javier Mabry or Lorena Garcia on the more kind of left wing side in the House. I think this is Julie McCluskey's third session as Speaker. Her first one, ended with a huge blow up, right? I don't know if everyone remembers that, the big caucus meeting at the end of the 23 session where there was like an explosion of Dem infighting in front of the entire press corps, right? Every political reporter in the state was conveniently in the room. So I think those dynamics have gotten much better. I think, Elizabeth Epps, like I said, lost her primary. And so in a way, not that everything that happened bad in the House was her fault, but that has helped things. There still, was some of that tension. I mean, some of the lefties parties would complain about the corporate Dems and the Opportunity Caucus, which is the sort of one Main Street imprint in the building. And then folks who were more centrist would be like, we have to do something about tip workers. This is like, what are we doing here? Or would kind of look around and be like, man, this immigration bill or this trans bill is really like, do we want this big spotlight from Trump? We can't vote against it. We don't want to vote against it. We support this on values, but kind of nervous about the implications here. And especially as first introduced the trans bill, I think some people were a little freaked out about the family court provisions. But I think generally, while everyone gripes about that, and I hear about it a lot, it still was not like a meltdown session, right? No one came away knifing each other. There was fights. I think it was really common on the earned wage access bill I talked about earlier, the tipped worker bill. There was a lot of kind of infighting there. I think there was a little bit of internal division about SB5, like why can't you guys reach a deal that, this is on you to reach a deal and get the gov to sign it. I think on the House Republican side, this is Rose Puglisi's second session as minority leader after Mike Lynch got ousted last year after his DUI came to light. It's interesting. That's a really shitty job.
Minority leader in the House, only if you want it to be. I wrote speeches and was comms for the minority leader in the House for 2 sessions. That was the most fun I've ever had in my life at work, and it's not close.
I'm sure it's true. I think it's not what I mean by it's a shitty job is it's just like a really hard job because you have to balance like the I don't know, like the Rick Taggarts, right, of against and trying to be a minority and be disciplined in a way that you get your message out and you can try and win some power back, but also not spark fighting with the more like really conservative members of your caucus of Reps Bottoms, DeGraff, Bradley, right? And so that I think is really hard. And this goes back to before my time in the Capitol, right? When there was a lot of upheaval there. So I think Puglisi has tried as much as possible to give everyone space and has tried to work with the majority as much as she can without seeming like she's making deals that undermine the caucus. I think, as you know, Ian, there's often they'll make deals about, okay, how long are you going to talk on this versus not.
Right.
They still do that. But I think she's trying to find a way to like be productive and not seem like they're rolling over or not silencing the more right-wing voices. They don't stop Ken DeGraff from going to the well. He says a lot that I'm sure, makes some people in our operative world looking at a blue collar ad be like, geez, but I think she's trying to find a way to not have her caucus implode, right? And I think there was a little bit of frustration over 86, which is the social media bill that Polis vetoed.
And then nearly got overridden on, but did not ultimately. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and some of that was the Republican side. Depending on who you want to talk to, a lot of Republican votes flipped, and I think RMGO was involved in that. Rocky Mountain Gun Owners, which is a right-wing group, the bill is bipartisan. It was sponsored by Hartsook, Rep. Hartsook from Parker, who is not like a squish R or anything, but he's pretty, centered in the middle of the Republican Party. I'll confess, I don't know as much about Senate dynamics because I spend almost all my time in the House. I think it was interesting because they had a new majority or a president in James Coleman, right, who's like well liked. I don't know, a lot of people who say he's a well liked guy. I don't think
we had him on the show before session, and it's impossible to not just be charmed and happy to talk to him.
Yeah, I think I like President Coleman as a person. I don't know. It's interesting if you look at like the bills he took into his office, right? Not a lot of huge bombs. He did construction defects, but Rodriguez was on Senate Bill 5. Rodriguez was on the quote unquote Doge bill. If he's listening, I'm really mad that I called it that. The original version was more of the Doge bill, but which isn't to undercut Coleman. But I think it was a bit different because Fenberg would often take those into his office, right? And Fenberg certainly had a reputation for being somewhat close to the Gov's office. I think you saw some of that flip where some more of the kind of things slowing down happened in the House as opposed to the Senate, where maybe it would have last year. There's definitely, the Senate is interesting because they, on both R and D, because a lot of this doesn't get as public as the House, right? There's a lot more kind of backroom chatting, right, or more quiet division in the House where people are pretty public and will come talk to reporters about it. But certainly there's divisions there in the Dem Party, right? You have there's an entire back row of anyone who spends time in the Capitol will know what I'm talking about, of kind of more moderate Dems who, for instance, were the reason that SB3, the big gun bill, got amended, right? Because a lot of them were skeptical about voting for it without amendments that would make the governor happy, right? Or get the governor on board. So I think those dynamics are there. The Senate has a fair amount of internal division. It doesn't get crazy public, but there's a reason a lot of times industry waits for bills to go to the Senate to amend them because they know they can't do it in the House. What was different this year is some of the fights the governor was leery about got to the House second, and then things sort of could slow down there. As far as the Senate Republicans, I mean, I said at the beginning I have a lot of respect for them because they're really disciplined. Like they don't have a Ken DeGraff who gets up and talks about feticide and doesn't read books, sections of The Kite Runner to protest against like library bans or stopping library bans, I should say. The Senate is disciplined. You don't get these sound bites that go on 9 News the next day of Paul Lundeen or Barb Kirkmeyer or pick a name saying something. I think some of them are pretty conservative, of course. Like none of them are squishes either, but they're pretty good about staying on message. Paul Lundeen is a good minority leader. Barb Kirkmeyer is a really effective voice in the JBC. So I think they're pretty good at keeping things in house and sticking on message. They work well with Coleman and Rodriguez, as far as I can tell. Hopefully, I'm not putting my foot in my mouth as someone who doesn't spend a ton of time in the Senate. If Jesse Paul wants to tweet at me and correct me. But I think like they do what they can to get wins on the clock, on the calendar, right? I mean, they sacrificed Yigby, the Yes in God's Backyard bill that Rodriguez did in part as a deal with the Republicans. So Senate is a weird place. It's a lot more quiet, but there's a lot of sort of political maneuvering. I always compare it to everyone over there thinks they're doing House of Cards and half the time it's Veep, whereas the House is kind of it's like openly Veep half the time. Not to like belittle them at all, but like the House is pretty open with their fighting. It's not as like shady.
What did you make of the situation with freshman Representative Dusty Johnson, a Fort Morgan Republican who lost a committee spot, by my read, essentially by being too normal? I mean, essentially, and getting in a fight with Brandy Bradley, sort of. What happened there?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, I remember when it happened, but like, there's so much stuff during session that there's only so much I could pay attention to, and like, with absolute respect to all legislators, like sometimes the infighting on the House Republican side, it matters, but and the Democrats sometimes get annoyed at us for not paying more attention, but. If you're an almost 2-to-1 majority, heavy lies the crown. I'm going to focus a lot more on you. So I'm not totally sure. I know that Rep. Bradley often is not quiet in her criticism, right? The same way that Rep. Epps wasn't. And I know that got into it with Rep. Johnson. My sense is that didn't rise that much to the floor throughout session, but I might just have missed it, to be honest. There's a lot that goes on, and some we track closely and some are like, wow, what's going on over there? Anyway, back to what I was doing.
Session is 120 days. It feels like 120 years. So it's easy to lose track of things, even if you're paying close attention.
Yeah.
While we're still on that subject, Republicans started near the end of the session saying that they would complain to Daddy Trump and ask him to cut federal funding for Colorado if Democrats did XYZ.
Yeah.
Did that work?
I mean, I guess we'll see. I mean, it didn't work in the sense that bills were not killed because of that. Bills were not watered down because of that. They certainly did it. I mean, they attempted amendments on on SB3, the big gun bill, on the trans bill, I think on the immigration bill. I'm pretty sure on the immigration bill, and then made this point more broadly when the House. This was all happening in the House, to my understanding. I don't think it happened in the Senate, but again, correct me if I'm wrong. Someone out there. Where they would attempt to put in amendments that would say, okay, this bill is invalidated unless we get a letter from the Fed saying we won't lose federal funding because of it, or this bill is invalidated if we do lose federal funding because of it. And then SB3, the big gun bill, was passed, and then the House Republicans wrote a letter to Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, saying, hey, you should investigate this and question its constitutionality, which I mean, that's a matter for the courts, right? Like that's which I was confused about and asked Rose Puglisi about, so I'm not clear, I guess. But the question of will that work in the sense of, did it kill legislation? No. Will it get Trump's attention? Will he strip more funding? I don't know. I mean, I know that's a real fear. Like both on the budget side, I think Republican members of the JBC would say they're scared about it too, not because they hate Trump, because like they all want Medicaid. They all represent rural parts of Colorado, right? And if Medicaid goes away or gets cut, that's bad for them too.
I mean, their hospitals just get hosed, and a lot of them will close. Like, it's existential.
Yeah, 100%. So I think the fear of that is real, and I think Polis, spoke to it behind the scenes. He and his staff were constantly saying, we don't want to put a target on the state's back by passing some of this stuff. And I think there's a difference of opinion on whether you should pass these sort of bills in the face of someone like Trump, or you should try and go easy. I won't put my thumb on the scale, but I think if you look at what's happened with Columbia and Harvard, for instance, appeasement only gets you so far, I think is maybe something to take away from all that experience. Anyway, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, it certainly Trump has a retributive quality to him, right? Shall we say?
That's very generous. Yeah.
And I think like an interesting episode was the whole portrait gate, right? Like,
yeah.
And that like got the attention of like everyone in the Capitol for obvious reasons, but not only like him tweeting it, but he put something on True Social on Sunday. And later that day, Polis, the governor, called at least James Coleman to say, hey, just so you know, this is out there. And then within a day, the portrait was gone. And
it's been there for years.
It's been there for years. That's an entirely different weird saga.
My finest work was accidentally raising the money for that portrait, and the fact that he hated it so much and got it taken down is just like the coda to that entire experience for me. I want to ask about one more sort of like lost item, because there was a lot of hullabaloo made at the beginning of session and then through the session about this bill that would have allowed the legislature to essentially initiate a lawsuit to overturn or otherwise challenge Tabor.
Yeah.
And it seemed to have not happened. I think you said earlier that it was one of the unsung victories for the minority. What's the story there? What happened to that thing?
Yeah, so it was funny. Nick Coltrane, who covers the Capitol with me for the Post, the reason I'm usually not in the Senate is Nick is in the Senate and I'm usually in the House. But we were like sitting in the House one day just working on something toward the end of the day, and this resolution got read across that if it had passed, read across as introed for those who don't live in the Capitol, got introed that would say, like, if this is passed by the legislature, basically we will direct legislative lawyers to draft a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of Tabor. So we were sitting there and talked to Reps Camacho and Garcia, who were sponsoring it, with Rep Zokai from Fort Collins, who the three of them, I mean, really Zokai and Garcia, but Camacho partially too. I don't want to throw him into too much of a lefty camp, but really we're sort of advocating for a broader discussion about the state's revenue process, right? Tabor is a huge part of this, but Garcia had a resolution that also never saw the light of day that would have made our income tax progressive, right? So I can't remember the exact numbers, but would have, for most people in the state, would have been a tax cut. For the wealthiest,
this was a version of what the Bell Policy Center tried to put on the ballot in 2020, and just because of COVID, I think stopped signature collection.
Right. So Garcia's never saw the light of day, this income tax, and like the governor would not have liked that. I think the governor's very open about where he's at on the income tax.
He also would not have had anything to say about it because it would have been referred to the voters directly with pure majorities. But anyway,
100%. But the gov, as we talked about, is very enmeshed in the legislature, for better or worse. So the Tabor resolution got introed, it got through a committee, it passed, and then it just nothing happened from there. It was never brought to the floor. It needed a vote in the House, it needed another committee, and then a vote in the Senate. Never happened. And I know there was some talk about, okay, what if we drop the income tax thing in exchange for the Tabor thing going through? So there was like some attempt to get it moving. I think certainly the Republicans would have done everything they can to drag that out as long as possible. I think the Republicans' lesson from Prop HH, which is the property tax thing from a couple of years ago, their lesson from that was, it involved Tabor. It had a lot of interplay with Tabor, was don't touch Tabor. That was the lesson the voters told us. I think HH was a defeat that had 1,000 fathers. I think there's a lot of reasons that thing went down. But Tabor was probably a part of it. I don't want to say they're lying or they're wrong, but there was a lot going on with that. It sounded like, so it never came forward in the House. And it sounds like at least a part of that was because the votes maybe weren't there in the Senate. What the Majority Leader Rodriguez told me on a couple of days before session was just didn't have the votes. There were people who were concerned, kind of tier one seats, right, the swing seats in the Senate, that if they voted to get rid of Tabor or authorize a lawsuit to sue to use taxpayer money to sue the state to get rid of the taxpayers' Bill of Rights. However you feel about it, that's sort of the one way to describe what would have happened. That it might have cost them their seats. It would have been difficult for them to vote for. It would have dragged out the calendar. And there were already fights, right? 1312, the trans bill was a long fight that lasted until a day or two before session, the day before session ended. So I think it was partially a clock thing. Partially people were nervous about voting for it, candidly. I think there's certainly more appetite to talk about Tabor. I mean, the budget is going to be worse next year. It's not getting better. And there's something to be said for the fact that we're a wealthy state. It's not like we're broke. We're a wealthy state, and we don't pay teachers very well. I remember living when I was in Wyoming covering schools. I would be shocked every year. We would get these rankings of the highest paid teachers, the best per pupil funding in the country, and Wyoming would be 4th or 5th.
And Colorado you have free public college for everybody thanks to real severance taxes on oil and gas. It's wild.
Yeah, and Wyoming's insane. There's court cases, and there's a lot going on with their education funding. It's super interesting, but then Colorado would always be near the bottom, which I never understood because this wealthy, super wealthy state.
Your mouth to God's ear, man. We're with you. We don't get it either.
It's kind of bizarre to me. I understand that there's a sense that this is really a radioactive topic, right? And even when someone says we should reform Tabor, they will always say, but we should keep the part where voters get to decide if their taxes go up. It's usually
I would say that.
Yeah, it's usually a question of can we change the cap calculation so we don't get penalized when the economy is doing better, right? So I think the Dems still need to figure out where they're at on it, candidly. I think if it were up for an up or down vote, if it had made it to the House, it probably would have passed. The Senate would have been tough. I mean, the House has more cushion. But is it going to come forward next year? 26 is an election year. Even if it's going to be a blue wave year, which I right now, sitting here in May 2025, feels like, we'll see. Some of the elections since election day have suggested it's not going to be great years for the Republicans, but who knows? It's a long ways away. But still, it's an election year, right? And do you want to vote on taxes? The messaging on that from the opposition, however you feel about it, writes itself. Democrats voted to take away your ability to stop taxes from going up and to cut your tax return, right? Whatever the argument will be. But I think, Ian, you and I talked about this at some point recently, I think, too. I can't remember. I think there are more people willing to talk about it. The speakers talked more about it. Nick asked Polis a couple of times about it yesterday. I mean, the budget's not getting better. It's
hard to avoid now. Yeah.
It's hard to avoid. Yeah. And they're going to be back in a special session in September when the Medicaid cuts come down. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what will happen, if it'll be inside the building or out, but the conversation will happen.
We had Jeff Bridges on the show a couple weeks ago, and we keep referring to this interview because it was actually really illuminating and impactful. And we said, why is the state cutting the budget even though our economy is doing extremely well and all the shit from Trump hasn't quite hit the fan yet? And he goes, it's Tabor. That's it. It's the answer. And he's right, mathematically.
Yeah, I mean, I abused myself and listened to every JBC meeting in the month of December. For those who don't know, the month of December, all the agencies come before the Joint Budget Committee, which is the legislative committee that writes the budget, and they, talk about their budget, right? And it was I listened every single day, and it was interesting because Barb Kirkmeyer, who's a Republican, very smart, one of the most effective Republicans in the state of Colorado, every time would say, structural deficit. We have a spending problem. And then Jeff Bridges almost every time would come back and say, we do have a structural deficit. We do have a problem, but it's Tabor. It was an interesting sort of dynamic, and you could see kind of the lines being drawn of where people are going to go, because this Tabor conversation probably has to happen, right?
Let's put a bow on this session a bit. Who are the obvious, in your sense, the obvious winners and losers?
I think a big loser is the governor. Not a big loser, but
cut, post.
Yeah,
thanks.
Right. Yeah. Well. No. Oh no. The governor's office will send me even more useful statements now. Great. Keep that in, please. I think the governor strikes me as one. We already talked about a bunch, but the things he wanted to do, he talked about in his State of the State. Tipped wages was one. Winnowed tiny down, and he wanted it bad enough that he tried to inject it into the labor negotiations at the last minute. The dereg bill ended up a total shadow of its original self, to the point where now it's not even really pro-business that much. Like now it kind of had Colorado Winds got some stuff in there. Pinnacle privatization never happened, which is another thing they wanted. The school funding they had proposed, averaging changes. That didn't happen. Yigbee got killed on the calendar. Certainly he got other things he wanted done. But I think there was a big bucking there of the governor, which was notable. Who were some winners? I mean, it was such a weird session because there wasn't like these big policy swings. You had these kind of like I said, value statements and kind of social fights. And again, I don't mean to belittle like the immigration bill or the trans bill because those were really important. I think it was interesting because a lot of people coming into it thought there was going to be this big, and they talked about it a lot during session, this big left versus moderate Dem fighting, right? There was a big primary last year where a ton of money got spent. One Main Street launched the Opportunity Caucus. And I think both sides kind of came away with wins and came away with losses and had enough to gripe about each other. So I think there was some level of a draw. I'm sure people on both sides will disagree with that, but from where I'm standing, it felt like everyone kind of came out okay. I mean, man, I'm trying to think of who was a big winner. I mean, I mean, the SB3 was a huge win. Let's Tom Sullivan and Julie Gonzalez, Annie Basenecker, and Meg Froelich. Yeah, I mean, getting that done, even though it was not what they had introduced, and it was not, I think if you talk to some of the sponsors privately and some of the supporters, they were not psyched with the ultimate product, but they were happier than if it hadn't passed.
I mean, you have something resembling an assault weapons ban in Colorado now, whereas that was out of the fucking question not that long ago. So I would agree with you. Yeah.
100%. And getting that, it's weird because when things happen at the beginning of session, we all tend to just like push them out of our brain. There's so much that happens. Right. But I think that was like kind of a quietly, it feels quiet now, but it wasn't the time. But that's a huge shift for the state. And it was sort of, I wrote this in one of my stories about it, but there's been this shift. I mean, Ian, I'm sure you remember 12, 13 years ago, the recalls, right? And how.
Oh no, I was the fucking comms director for the House Dems who passed the background check bill and the magazine limit. So our members didn't get recalled. They ended up focusing on the Senate, but I remember that like it was yesterday. Yeah,
and so like that, and Nick and I wrote a story about this last year, but that what happened that year led to like fear for years about doing gun policy. That's gone like entirely.
100%.
Right?
It's also because like the state has moved politically. RMGO is not nearly as powerful as they once were, even in Republican primary politics, to say nothing of the fact that like massive support for doing something about gun violence exists in Colorado
sick of
now.
It.
Yeah. I think, well, here's two maybe winners. I think the hospitals, this is a good one, actually. I think the hospitals came away feeling pretty good. They got the 340B win that they wanted.
Please unpack that.
Oh, my God. I hate 340B. 340B is a federal discount drug program that says, in extremely brief, pharmaceutical companies, you have to give discounts on prescriptions to hospitals that have a certain amount of like Medicaid and lower income patients, right? So pharma has been sort of systematically trying to limit this. So a bunch of states have been running bills saying you can't limit this. So this year there was a bill saying you can't limit this. The hospitals backed. Then there was another bill that backed by pharma as a union and unions that said, okay, but we want to know where the money is going. You have to spend it on certain things. You have to report. This kind of an insane fight because there's like the hospitals. I know they're if Alec Garnett is listening, I'm going to get a text about this. Like
Alec Garnett used to host this show, so
oh shit. Well,
partially,
hi, Mr. Speaker. Certainly there are hospitals that are struggling. I'm not going to undercut that at all. But like UC Health, the large hospital industry is a pretty moneyed part of our society. Pharma even more so, right? So this is sort of like a lot of money just kind of smashing into each other. Hospitals won because that they've won everywhere and they're probably going to win this one. So they won on that, and then they won on God, this is getting in the weeds, so I apologize. The Medicaid unwind post-COVID has been very messy and has hurt a lot of frontline providers, rural providers.
There were a lot of people added to the Medicaid rolls during the pandemic. Getting them back off the rolls and figuring out what to do with them has been a real pain for absolutely everybody involved.
Yeah. Right. And the impact is more people without insurance who still need healthcare, right? In our country, we don't provide it to them unless you're poor enough or sick enough to get it for free,
or rich enough to pay for it, right?
Or rich enough to pay for it, right? Or your job does. So the impact of losing a bunch of people losing a bunch of Medicaid is one, that's bad for them, and it's bad for the healthcare system that helped them. So there was a bill that would have capped hospital reimbursement rates, basically how much they could get for care for certain patients, state employees, and then part of that money would go to frontline clinics, right? Federally qualified health centers. They do not like that. Hospitals don't like reimbursement rate limits. So they successfully came up with another proposal which would still steer money. They said, okay, we hospitals will privately raise $40 million, $20 million and $20 million, year one, year two, and give it to the clinics, give it to these providers. And also we're going to tap tens of millions of dollars more from a state treasurer fund. So hospitals, I think, is a winner. Not only for that, but Medicaid didn't get gutted. The state legislature didn't have to destroy Medicaid to pay for it. Which is also another winner is sort of schools in that sense. Schools are getting, under the School Finance Act, are getting more money. I'm sure they're not happy completely because the school funding formula that they just rolled out is being slow rolled. As it was looking in December, everyone on the JVC was like, all right, brace yourselves. We're just going to saw through everything. And that didn't happen, which is, good, I guess, for now.
Right. Any other big fights or issues that we haven't covered? This has been an awesome conversation. We're so glad you came on the show right after to explain this 120-day sprint. I mean, I guess two questions. One, anything we haven't covered, and then two, talk about this upcoming special session, its sort of percentage chance of likelihood and what you think is going to be in there.
That we can two for this, because the one thing we haven't talked about is the AI fight that happened at the end of the session.
Till 11:59 p.m., if I'm not mistaken, right?
Literally. I mean, that was insane. If I can just tell that story real quick.
Yeah, please do.
So last year, Rodriguez, the majority leader, passed an AI bill that just generally speaking tries to prevent discrimination in AI. But it requires companies that use AI, whether that's developers or, businesses,
hospitals with a chatbot, right?
Yeah. Or businesses that use AI to screen applications. It requires a lot more notification of the applicant in that sense, right? Of when you're using it, why you rejected, that kind of thing. So it passed last year. The Polis signed it, but he said at the time, okay, I'm going to sign this, but we got to talk about this shit, okay? So they met, they had a task force. They dealt with it all year. Rodriguez dropped this bill a few weeks ago that would delay the implementation. The tech folks and other people who interact with AI, depending on who you want to believe is behind it, were not pleased. They wanted a longer runway, and were quietly jockeying to get a longer runway. Rodriguez got wind of that and said, no, fuck this, and he just killed his own bill in committee. We were all expecting him to come in with an amendment, and instead he said, no amendment, and also I'm PIing it, which is postponed indefinitely. It's killing your bill. So, nuclear bomb. But it's weird. As you both probably know, there's so many things going on in the session. Some of these fights are really big, but they're really discrete simultaneously. And depending on what world you're swimming in that moment, you might hear about it, first might not. Anyway, so that was oh shit, what are we going to do? Later that day, the governor, I think Bennett, Mike Johnston, Weiser, I think your wife was Pedersen on that letter?
That's right. Yeah. And Nagus, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Nagus, right. Said I'll put out a letter that was whoa, please fucking do something. This is not good. No, but the thing was, so this is Monday. Session ends Wednesday. As everyone who works in the legislature knows, you can pass a bill in 3 days. But so that means they had to do something by Monday at midnight. They had to have a bill introed, something had to happen. And this letter came out, and the House was literally in the process of going home. The House, they had just adjourned. And I remember I saw McCluskey, and I was and she was and obviously they were going to do it in the Senate because Rodriguez runs the calendar. He was not going to let that happen. So it was just kind of oh shit, what are we going to do? So the next night, right, it was Tuesday night, the House does the trans bill, which goes until about 10:30, somewhere in there. I went home at 9:30-ish, regretted that immediately. So I'm so they get that done. And then Duran, the majority leader in the House, goes to the mic and says, okay, we're going to do seconds, basically. We're going to do more work. We're not done. And she pulls up this bill, 322, which had to do with the attorney general's discovery powers and who keeps records. This is whatever. And then she Rule 14s it, which means she's limiting debate. So she's saying we're only going to talk about this for an hour, which is notable because usually that happens on abortion bills or gun bills or stuff Republicans.
It's a way they're trying to just basically stop the minority from filibustering the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Right?
we want this done. And usually it happens when there's been a breakdown in negotiations between Duran and Puglisi. So doing it on this, over this bill, I was like, I don't even, what does this bill even do? Like, obviously they had to get it done by midnight for it to pass because they needed 2 more votes on it. They needed to do another vote on it on Wednesday, the final day. But still, that alone, I was sitting at home and I was about to turn off the stream when 1312, the trans bill was done. I was like, oh shit, that's okay. And then Shannon Byrd got up and talked about it. And then William Linstead, who's a Broomfield Democrat, got up and said, okay, cooler heads need to prevail. I'm slipping an amendment into this bill that has to do with the Attorney General to delay the AI bill. It's totally separate, completely separate things. He's like, we're going to do this. We have to do it, whatever. And then Rep. Titone, who's an Arvada Democrat who sponsored the AI bill last year, sponsored the bill that Rodriguez killed voluntarily. She gets up and just like filibusters, basically. But she only has an hour to do it, right? So then the clock gets to, I don't know, 11:30, 11:40. So then you're starting to get, oh shit. Because if this doesn't get done by midnight, it's done. It's over.
Clock strikes midnight. Every bill that hasn't been dealt with dies.
Is done, right. And so this AI fix has to come. Like, there's questions about, like, then it would have to go back to Rodriguez in the Senate, and he has no reason to pull that fucker up for last kind of consideration. I didn't talk. Nick talked to him, so I didn't talk to him the next day. So I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember exactly how much he knew or what he would have done. But it wasn't like this was going to happen cleanly. But still, like. So one, it was shocking they were doing this to begin with. And I remember texting Nick at like 11. I'm like, dude, turn on the fucking stream. Like, what? So then they get done. The clock's over on debate. Then Majority Leader Duran gets up and does Rule 16, which basically says we're voting now. Nothing else is happening. After, man, this is so legislatively stupid. On second reading, after you're done with second reading, you go to something called the COW, which you can then run amendments on the COW, which allows you more time.
Committee of the Whole. It's basically another second reading. Yeah.
Yes. Which is like the final vote on second readings, and you can run more amendments. So Titone had the ability to get up on the COW and then talk for 20 more minutes, essentially, and kill it. So Duran got up and tried to get rid of that and just call the question, like, vote now, let's be done. It died because a bunch of Republicans voted with some of the skeptical, more lefty Dems against this, which is weird. I'm probably maybe a mistake on their part in the sense that like businesses wanted this. Right. And Republicans voted sort of on principle because they hate when the Dems do this, hate when they limit debate, hate when they call the question. So I think it was more of a principled thing. But man, did it piss the business industry off, piss the governor off, which I'm sure the R's weren't upset about. So anyway, so the vote to call the question fails. So then Titone just gets up and talks out the clock. And at one point, if you watch the live stream, at one point you can see Duran come over, and this happens from time to time. You see Duran come over and put a sticky note on the lectern for Titone, which is usually that means, I don't know exactly what was on it, but usually when someone gets a sticky note, it means either shut the fuck up or like pivot, right? Say something else. So Duran does that with maybe 4 or 5 minutes left on the clock before midnight. It's like 11:55, 11:56. And I'm like staring, I'm like this close to the clock on my laptop. And then Titone just talks until like 11:59. And then McCluskey, the speaker, did something of a faux pas and cuts her off, stops her, which you're not supposed to be able to do. And then gives the well to Duran to basically call it time, call it day. So then it died and it just exploded and was over. So this insane late night attempt, which was insane on its own, then died in an insane fashion. Right, that was such a long story.
No, but I love high drama. I love like the last day of session clock stuff. We were there when Frank McNulty destroyed 30 some odd bills to stop civil unions from happening. That seems fucking quaint by comparison to the politics we deal with these days. But so the special session will likely include this AI thing and maybe some federal funding conversations. Is that the scope you think is coming?
Oh my God, I forgot we were talking about special session. I got lost in the sauce.
That's why I'm the interviewer, right?
So there were rumors, like I came in Wednesday morning and there were rumors that there may be a special session like Monday to deal with this. So the big roadblock there is we don't have any money. Like they explicitly took away the money to fund special sessions. Like that was part of the JVC process.
I didn't know that.
And I think either Jesse or Brian asked McCluskey in one of the later press avails we had with them of like, what are we going to have to do? And she was like, the JVC is going to have to find a way to give us money. They'll have to run a bill or whatever. So we asked Polis about this yesterday. Nick ran into him. He was bringing donuts to the press room yesterday or Wednesday. And Nick asked him, like, are we going to have a special session on this? And he gave the answer that I think most of us who kind of had a sense of how things were going was expected, which is no, probably not just for AI. Not only is that going to be a massive ball of worms, because a lot of people have a lot of feelings about AI, not only because of, should business get to just come in and fiddle with regulations, but like people think AI now and they think Elon Musk and like tech oligarchs and billionaires, and like, fuck these people. So I think there's some tricky politics there too. But we are going to be back in September for when Congress inevitably guts Medicaid.
What are you talking about? They're just ferreting out waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well,
Medicaid?
Man, that waste, fraud, and abuse really provides healthcare to a lot of Coloradans. So when it gets cut, as it inevitably seems like it will, the legislature is going to have to come back probably in September or October after that gets done to figure it out. And I haven't started asking about what figure it out means, right? But to make a long story short, I don't think we'll see a special session just on AI, and Polis has basically said as much. I think we're going to get one on Medicaid and federal funding issues, and that's all assuming Trump doesn't turn around and say, fuck you, Colorado, I'm taking money here and there or whatever. I think we'll see one at the end in late summer, early fall. And I think the call, meaning the calling legislators back, you have to say what it's for, will be broad enough, and it will include federal funding, and also, hey, by the way, this AI thing. Because AI, the regulations don't kick in until like February of next year, I think.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if you talk to people in the industry, like, that's not enough time. Even if you come
they're planning investments or not right now. So it's the same thing with all these tariffs. Can you come back and preview that and then do an autopsy on it for us? This has been unbelievably fun, Seth. I mean, you and I talk a lot. I'm grateful for that. But having you on the show here, this is like the most information per second I think we've ever had on the podcast. So, and thank you very much for coming on the Get More Smarter podcast. Seth Klamann, Statehouse reporter, soon to be other things reporter for the Denver Post. You have been awesome. We are grateful for your time. Thank you so much for coming on the Get More Smarter podcast.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for letting me word vomit at you for like an hour. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well,
All right, let's stick with the state legislature for a moment, because in the last week or two, House Republicans really just decided to keep showing their asses to the very end.
And the legislative sessions are live streamed, so that is not friendly material for younger viewers.
No, it's not. Freshman Representative Rebecca Kelty, who's a Republican from Colorado Springs, she beat Democrat Stephanie Behill by 3 votes.
And best friend of the pod, Christy Powell, calls her 3-vote Becky as a result.
3-vote Becky. That's
or Becky
right.
3 votes. I can't remember which.
3-vote Becky, 3-vote. Really demonstrated why that election should not have gone that way recently. She was on a libertarian podcast called Free State Colorado, in which she called her colleagues evil and soulless, and those were the nice parts.
These people, I'm telling you, I've never seen a group of people that are so, like, I guess, for lack of a better term, evil. I feel it when I come in there. I pray. As soon as I enter the building, I pray. As soon as I enter that room, I pray. So while I'm in there, I'm praying. As I leave, I'm praying. Like, I have never prayed so much in my life. And it's just the feeling and the fact that I went in there with an open mind of respect. I have lost almost all of them, except for maybe a few, but all respect. Like, I can't even look at them in the face. It's very difficult for me to think that, they even have a soul. I'm not even sure they even have a soul. And their eyes are just, I don't know. I know it sounds weird, but I'm telling you, these people are corrupt. And the amount of money that they're going through, it's like you get, it's a fiscal note of 0. No, it's going to cost millions of dollars. But they just, they cheat and they scheme and they scam. And your money in Colorado, every penny you give the state is not safe in the hands of these people. It's just not. We're paying for hippie camps. We're paying for, hundreds of brand new vehicles that they don't need. We're paying, I gave them $70 million of cuts they could make. Because that's what I do in the civilian world. I go through contracts. I look at every word. That's what I do. And I'm like, here you go, silver platter, $70 million worth of cuts just from me. And they just, no thanks. And they just threw it to the side. It's a shame. And hate to say this, but it's almost like the state of Colorado needs to be burned to the ground. And
Jesus
the
Christ.
top up. I hate to say that, but from the ashes of the fire will rise a phoenix. And that phoenix is going to be us. We are going to be that phoenix. But until we take it all the way down and we get these sons of guns out of there, I almost said a bad word. Anyways, get them out of there. I'm not sure what else we can do.
We're going to burn the state of Colorado to the ground, says a Republican member of the State House of Representatives. That's great.
I don't know if that re-election slogan will work in 2026.
Revote Becky. Burn Colorado to the ground.
I didn't even know who this was, really. And I remembered her.
It is something, right? And we talked about that election because it was the closest one in history. But I like you, I utterly lost track of this person after that, and then she pops her head up and says one of the more ridiculous things I think we've ever heard a state rep say, and we cover Scott Bottoms and Ken DeGraff.
That's right. Well, we'll keep the ridiculous train going because Republican Representative Don Suckla from Montezuma County had this idiotic rant about the internet tubes. He was opposed to a bill that wanted to make it increase criminal penalties if you knowingly publish like an AI sex video of somebody or something online. What is truly amazing about this, before we play it, he posted this speech to his own Twitter account as though it was something to be proud of.
This happens a lot. Like MTG does this. Other like congressional Republicans do this, where they're like, "Hey, last episode, I think Nancy Mace's confrontation with that guy in the makeup store. It's like, you don't want this up there, and you're the one posting it. So let's take 2 minutes and 30 seconds to hear from Don Suckla about the internet."
Later, we would have the newspaper write something that was completely false and incorrect. Completely false and incorrect. And the only way that we became to where we at least could get our voice out there, and that's what the difference is. You guys have all of these museums and culture, and you have all of these things. And the only thing that we have in rural Colorado that at least kind of puts us on an even pace with you, not even even pace, is the internet. The internet is where we get our voice. The newspaper, so what I did after, it took me 6 years to kind of figure it out. What I did was, as soon as we made a decision on that board and we had something else going on, I was already on my phone and I was putting exactly how it really happened, and I put it out on social media. And it's the only way that I was able to stop it, because I was able to have a voice that was faster and greater than that newspaper that did not like me, and a lot of them other newspapers. It was the only way. And so this is a rural Colorado deal. This is a way to keep I'm up here for a different reason. First of all, this where you think that you're going to stop this or stop that, they're already running a circle around you. Yes, do we need to do something about it? But is this the way? No. I can tell you what, I'm speaking for rural Colorado, and I'm speaking for those people in those 8 counties, and I'm going to do whatever I can this year and next year. If there is a bill that comes up and tries to censor the internet, and I have to go to a protest so that my daughter can play volleyball because they forced her that she couldn't because she was in a room that was somebody else that had COVID, and then all of a sudden she's got to wear a mask at physical exercise, and a lot of those kids got sick. We have such short memories of what happened and how they beat us down, and the only thing that we had that put us on par was the internet. And I'll tell you one thing, I will fight. I don't care which party you belong to. If you go after the internet, which is the only thing that gives a voice to rural Colorado, I'm coming after you. I would vote no.
What a fucking journey.
That has a very strong old man yelling at clouds vibe. My daughter, COVID.
I'm like really glad I didn't watch that until we recorded, because it's hard to contain my shock. Again, like, Republicans are out of power in Colorado. They have been for a while. They will be for the foreseeable future. And it's probably not because they keep putting people like him and 3-Vote Becky in the legislature
Again, this was on a bill to just say you can't post knowingly fake AI videos and content about another person.
But
and he took it to be.
But Don Suckla is not going to let you regulate the internet, Jason. Not on
No.
his watch.
No, not on his watch.
It's all they have in rural Colorado, the internet.
Yeah, I don't get the whole part about the museums, and you guys have museums, and we just have the internet. Okay.
It feels like a lot of pent up resentment just kind of all coming out at once. And that kind of thing is really good for therapists, not in the well of the Statehouse.
Not the floor of the Statehouse.
Right.
And before we move on, Colorado Springs Republican Rep Scott There's No Bottoms and Ken Dildo DeGraff, as we've talked about, spend a lot of time talking on the House floor, more than most people. Guess how many bills they have now passed, combined, in 3 legislative sessions?
Oh, like to the governor's desk signed into law?
Yeah.
My guess is 0.
2.
One
They've
each
done
or
2
two
in
total?
3 years. DeGraff had one bill this session that made it through the House but died in the Senate.
Oh, you're not even talking about to the governor's office.
Oh, no. They have there's 2 that they passed.
Okay, got it.
In 3 years. And then just this session, there was one between the 2 of them that got there. They spend all this time talking, and they do nothing.
Some people are not there to make laws. The question is, why would you vote for them to begin with? But,
They're just there to
representative
talk.
democracy in action, yo. That's a great thing.
All right, let's talk about dear leader Trump. We're seeing more impacts from his unpredictability about the economy. We've been saying this a while, that the on again, off again tariff stuff and all his other economic random statements are making it hard to negotiate anything with other countries or for any businesses to have any certainty whatsoever. To quote our friend's public enemy, you can't trust it.
Can't trust it.
People apparently don't trust that Trump is actually going to abide by any foreign trade deals. According to a Politico Public First poll, less than 1/3 of respondents in the United Kingdom and 44% of Americans said they believe Trump would abide by any deal. Nearly half of Americans, including 25% of MAGA voters, said Trump's unpredictability is the biggest barrier to negotiations.
Are you surprised?
No, but this is something that should be a bigger deal than it is. People don't think the president of the United States will abide by a deal that he makes with another country.
Why would they? He has proven time and again that he is willing to throw out anything, including the Constitution, that gets in the way of whatever particular whim he has at any given moment. So, yeah, of course not. I'm surprised, quite frankly, the number is that high in the UK and among non-MAGA voters, because you can't trust this guy at all.
No. Nope. And this whole situation is about to get a lot worse. It feels like, to me, it almost feels like we're kind of on the cusp of that early in the pandemic when people are kind of like, oh, wait, this is going to get bad.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this might actually be a thing.
There's also new numbers from Navigator Research on Trump's tariff plan, which people really don't like, and they're disliking more and more as time goes on.
Navigator Research, something that we've relied on the show for a while for statewide numbers, and they're very reliable pollsters. Since January, support for Trump's tariff plan has declined by a net 15 points. It started -4, now it's -19, with nearly 2 in 5 non-MAGA Republicans opposing the plan at 37%, 61% of independents opposing it. Overall support, 37%. Oppose, 56%. There's your -19, down from -14 in March and -4 in January. 6% of Democrats support Trump's tariff plan. I would like to meet them. 90% oppose. Like we said, 61% of independents oppose it, and even 20% of Republicans oppose this. And to your point, they're just getting started. There's a lot of news this week about shipping containers coming into Los Angeles. fewer boats with fewer containers means fewer products, which means more expensive everything.
Yep.
Trump and company are trying to justify this all by saying things like, well, you can only buy your kid 5 pencils, or your daughter only needs $2 instead of 20. And I just can't imagine anybody letting Joe Biden or Kamala Harris get away with saying something like that.
Well, let's start with where things are about to get really bad. Because up until now, the tariff talk, particularly with China, hasn't felt real. But that's going to change very quickly. Here's CNN from just a couple of days ago.
Big ships move pretty slow, so it's taken a while for the tariffs that President Trump imposed a few weeks ago to actually kick in, but now they are kicking in. Here in the Port of Los Angeles, normally the busiest port in the country, they have seen this week a 50% drop in the ships.
Right.
A trucker who last week was hauling about 4 or 5 containers a day, this week will likely haul just 2 or 3.
Why? Because there's a 145% tariff on most of that stuff. So what's that going to mean for the Port of LA? For the people who work here, the longshoremen, it's going to mean less money. It's going to mean less overtime. For the truck drivers, it's going to mean maybe in the past they were doing 4 or 5 loads a day. Now they're maybe going to do 2 or 3. There's a lot of anxiety here. People are worried. People don't know what's going to happen.
We can see right now this cargo volume will be light for the weeks and months ahead.
There's uncertainty and a lot of anxiety.
Great job, dipshit.
Half of the ships that they normally have. Just think about what that's going to mean for the, shelves on stores.
And this is just the first iteration. This gets worse, not better, as he digs in, as China laughs. They have already been planning for this. They know what's coming. They've been doing this for years. They're sitting there reading The Art of the Deal, cracking up, because every week this goes on, the half gets cut in half, which gets cut in half, which gets cut in half. And to your point, that means fewer items on shelves. Supply and demand means each one of those items gets more expensive. Anybody who voted for this guy because they thought he was going to make things cheaper, sorry, we tried to tell you.
Yeah, it's about, people are going to freak out. We're looking at, like, by July at the latest, this is going to get really weird.
Unless he caves, and he might cave, right? Like, this is a guy who's known for picking a fight and then backing down the second.
But even
somebody
then, it's
stands
going
up
to take a while to get it back to normal.
That's right.
So what does Trump have to say about all this? Here he is in the White House recently.
Because business has slowed down, as you mentioned, we're seeing as a result, the ports here in the U.S., the traffic has really slowed, and now thousands of dock workers and truck drivers are worried about their jobs.
That means we lose less money. When I see that, that means we lose less money. Look, China.
What?
Business genius Donald Trump.
We're not going to make any money, but we'll lose less.
Well, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Don't you get it?
I guess.
This isn't the only place the biggest loser's losing, is it?
No, not at all. To the surprise of absolutely nobody, Doge didn't work, as the Washington Post reports. The U.S. Doge service has been an abject failure. Of the $165 billion it claims to have saved, estimates of its actual verifiable savings are around $65 billion, and even that might be an exaggeration.
Do you remember when Elon was saying he could cut $2 trillion from the federal budget and nobody would feel it?
We got about 3% of the way there.
And it's like all blood, right? Like there's no fat. It's all muscle. It's all bone. They're sawing into stuff that people rely on. Just this week, we learned that NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado, is going to be laying off dozens of staff across the whole department. It's hundreds. This keeps getting worse. More workers getting laid off, more economic disruption, more dumb bullshit. All for what? They're not even saving any money doing it. It's going to cost more on the back end because this gap has to get filled by somebody. Can I give you my current bugaboo?
Yeah.
Ever since they started laying off people at the National Weather Service, the fucking forecasts have been off. Have you noticed this?
Yeah.
They say it's going to rain. It doesn't. They say it's going to be clear. It's not. They say it's going to be cold. It's hot. They say it's going to be hot. It's cold. I might sound like a little tinfoil hat here, but I can't help but think if you lay off half or more of the staff at certain agencies, it's going to have a real impact. It wasn't just a bunch of people sitting around writing memos about wokeness. These people were doing important
Right.
jobs.
Right. That a lot of these these people were doing stuff that people rely on. I heard a story anecdotally from somebody this week about someone they know is a farmer in northeast Colorado who was trying to get a modest loan for, like $50,000, something like that. And he could not get it from the Department of Agriculture where he normally goes. And I don't, I doubt there's anybody there to even answer the phones as much anymore. But all of this stuff has a trickle-down effect that really impacts real people. And in this case, this farmer was a Trump voter.
I mean, they're the folks who are getting hurt the worst by all this. And lower income voters who shifted to Trump pretty massively over the last election cycle because of cost concerns are the ones who are going to be paying the price for all this bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Trump has also had to pull a nomination for the U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., Ed Martin.
And this is great news because this guy is one of the scariest sycophants who existed. People will remember he tweeted like, "Yes, sir, dear leader" shit a lot in his interim. He was acting U.S. attorney, but it looks like that acting will stop. Thank goodness.
Apparently, this came after North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis said he could not support Martin because of his enthusiastic backing of the January 6, 2021 insurrection.
I'm sorry, I was told that was a day of love where nothing bad happened, nobody died, and everything was fine.
Yeah, I guess so, but even Republican senators remember it differently, apparently.
Well, they were shitting their pants running through the hallways. So.
Yeah, they were there. And some Republicans are even getting tired of all the Trump nonsense. CNN reports that Nebraska Congressman Don Bacon is speaking out against legislation to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. I love this quote. He says, quote, "It just seems juvenile. We're the United States of America. We're not Kaiser Wilhelm's Germany or Napoleon's France. We're better than this. It just sounds like a sophomore thing to do," unquote. Apparently, there are a couple of other Republicans, including Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin, Jay Obernolte of California, who are criticizing the bill. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer even told members not to choose this issue as their hill to die on.
And wasn't this something that like Marjorie Taylor Greene started immediately selling merch about when the bill passed, right? So like it's just everything's a scam, everything's a cash grab, everything's stupid, and this is the worst. One of the worst parts about this is if you go to Google Maps and just try and do anything, you see this ridiculous Gulf of America thing there now as a capitulation to the dumbest people on the planet.
Well, I think some Republicans, too, are also looking at Congress, which passed only 6 bills in Trump's first 100 days, the fewest in 70-plus years, and saying, why are we doing this? Like, we're not even passing anything meaningful. We're going to waste time doing this?
They are starting to realize that they're going to have to go back to their constituents and either have something to explain about why everything costs more and is worse now, and they have no answer for it.
Yeah. And before we move on from this, I got a kick out of this clip from California Democratic Congressman Jared Huffman recently on the House floor.
Solve problems, defend democracy. And yes, this bill has been called a joke more than once in committee. I even offered an amendment to rename the entire planet Trump just to underscore the absurdity of their sycophantic bootlicking. But now, after seeing this bill advance not only through committee, but all the way through to the House floor for a final vote, it's getting a little bit harder to laugh because it's not a simple solve problem.
Planet Trump. It's true. Like, it's just fucking dumb. There's no point to this. All right, let's talk about our 8th-ish favorite member of Congress.
Yeah, speaking of hopeless sycophants who will lose their congressional seats next election cycle.
The New York Times is reporting on something we've been talking about for a while, that Gabe Evans is getting ready to take the votes that will end his career.
We've been saying he's a one-termer. We've been saying he shouldn't unpack any of the boxes in his empty office to fill his empty bookshelves. And besides the shiny new haircut in this feature image, Gabe Evans is really not doing very much to prove us wrong.
Here's the lead in this New York Times story. Quote, Representative Gabe Evans, Republican of Colorado, secured his ticket to Washington in November when he defeated a Democratic member of Congress by less than 1 percentage point, just 2,449 votes. Now Mr. Evans, 39, is helping to write legislation that could cement his own ticket back home. The story later says, as Republicans in Congress struggle to coalesce around the core pieces of what Mr. Trump calls his one big beautiful bill, Mr. Evans and other GOP lawmakers from some of the most competitive districts in the country are facing committee votes next week to approve cuts to popular programs that could come back to haunt them politically.
Again, we told you so.
Yeah. Evans did not respond to the New York Times for comment. This particular paragraph later in the story I thought was really interesting. Quote, privately, many Republicans on Capitol Hill said they expected the House to miss its self-imposed Memorial Day deadline to write and pass this bill and eventually to settle on a Senate-approved package of tax cuts that includes no major changes to Medicaid, food assistance, or any other popular program, unquote. This is what you and I thought might happen, that once it gets down to where you actually have to vote on these things and not just talk about them in the abstract, it's a lot harder to do.
Like we talked about in our interview with Seth, there is not $880 or $500 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse. This is a lot of healthcare for a lot of people. A lot of them live in Gabe Evans's district, and a lot of them live in a lot of the top 30 most vulnerable Republican members of Congress's districts as well. So unless they want an actual healthcare crisis on their hands, met with an actual political crisis they themselves will have caused for no good fucking reason, in order to cut taxes for the wealthiest people on the planet, they should start backing off this fast. I don't know. What do you think the chances are, though?
I didn't think they were. I wasn't sure until I started reading more and seeing more of these quotes as we got closer to the actual votes. And the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has reported that, yes, millions of Americans will lose Medicaid coverage if Republicans achieve this goal of $808 billion in cuts. There are a bunch of other Republicans in this New York Times story and elsewhere saying very specific Medicaid cuts have already been considered dead.
And let's pull some of these out. It's Jeff Van Drew, a Republican from New Jersey, Nick LaLota, a Republican of New York, both of whom have asses on the line in the next election if they cut this kind of money.
There's it's bad for the country, it's bad for their constituents, and it's bad for them.
It is really interesting why Gabe Evans is just all the way in with an agenda like this, when even guys like Jeff Hurd, who are in a district that is like basically 10 points safer, are kind of like, guys, I don't think this is such a good idea.
Yeah, let's not do this. Right. And Evans could end up being just holding a bag of shit at the end of this, because he's gotten tagged with wanting to cut Medicaid. Even if they don't eventually cut Medicaid, it's still going to stick to him.
At the Denver Post editorial board over here with a piece that came out on May 5th saying, many Coloradans would lose Medicaid under Trump's proposed expansion cuts, and because everyone is dumb, they had to put in the headline editorial so that no one confuses this with something that is not opinion. Colorado's clinics and hospitals are already feeling the strain of losing 500,000 patients from the post-COVID Medicaid wind down, like we talked about with Seth. And now Congress is threatening to slash and burn the nation's safety net health insurance. Great job, everybody. All nothing. All for tax cuts for people who are already invincibly wealthy, who will not notice this amount of money coming into their bank accounts, and who owe the country quite a bit more.
The other reason I think maybe this won't end up as bad as everyone maybe thought, Gabe Evans is now missing committee votes. He's a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee that is going to mark up these and make first proposals on Medicaid cuts. He skipped votes on amendments to these bills, including one to stop RFK Jr.'s Department of Health and Human Services from reducing Medicaid eligibility, halting mass layoffs at the Center for Disease Control. Evans was there in Congress. He did vote in the full House on a variety of bills that day. He's just not showing up to these committee hearings for very obvious reasons.
And getting on ENC, the Energy Commerce Committee, is like a little blue ribbon that you get, like for being a good soldier in the caucus, and it's a big deal for a freshman to be on that committee. Anyway, it was a big deal for him to get that appointment and for him to not show up. Why? Because either he doesn't want to be on the record on these votes, which is obvious cowardice, or because he has something better to do. This is your job, dude.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. He just doesn't want to have to vote on these things because he knows how bad it's going to be.
I mean, it's not like he just had a baby or anything, right?
All right, let's do a couple of quick hits and then we'll get out of here. The 2026 Senate map is not going to be good for Democrats. We've talked about this before.
It is the worst map available. There are 3 maps, right? Because there's 3 classes of senators. The 2014 map, which was a bloodbath for Democrats, is basically the map that we have in front of us for 2026. Not looking great. It's a bunch of Trump states up that Democrats either have seats in or Republicans will be defending, and it should be a little easier for them considering that.
And there's red states like Florida and Texas that really aren't winnable for Democrats, so it's hard to pad margins or, cover over mistakes. But Republicans are having trouble recruiting top-tier candidates because nobody wants to try to defend Trump's economy. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp was the top Republican hope to run against incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, friend of the pod.
That's right.
Kemp's decision not to run means that Marjorie Taylor Greene might jump in the race, which Democrats would love for obvious reasons.
I mean, we are all in for MTG for Senate. Let's go. 2026.
Absolutely. A former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu announced about a month ago that he would also not run for the Senate, despite an endorsement from President Trump and despite it being an open seat, because Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen is not seeking re-election.
Yeah, Congressman Chris Pappas from New Hampshire is the presumptive Democratic nominee. He's a great guy. He'd be the first openly gay member of the U.S. Senate, maybe ever, but certainly from New Hampshire. Big fan of his, big fan of what he's been doing. And that's good news because the Granite State has been doing weird shit lately, like electing Kelly Ayotte governor and having Republican majorities, even if their entire congressional delegation is Democrats. So they are not going to be able to put New Hampshire on the map in 2026, just like Sununu declined to run against Maggie Hassan in the 2022 election.
Now, if you're somebody who has higher political ambitions, like Brian Kemp thinks maybe he could run for president, you don't want to bang your head against the wall in 2026 trying to defend Trump's economy.
And we have to remember Brian Kemp was also the one that Donald Trump threatened and tried to ask to find him some magical votes to win the 2020 election in the state of Georgia that he lost.
Congressman Joe Neguse is, like a lot of us, sick of Republicans showing no spine whatsoever. Here he is during a recent hearing of the House Natural Resources Committee, just letting it all out.
Friend of the pod. Very good friend of the pod.
Never thought I would thank the chairman for opposing my amendment, but just being able to get him to say I oppose the amendment is a start. Mr. Stauber, do you oppose the amendment? You're going to vote on it in like 2 minutes. I didn't know your position on it. So
I remind members to address the remarks to the chair.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, does Mr. Stauber oppose the amendment? I'm directing the remarks towards you. Is that not? I yield back to
I'm just wondering if the gentleman from Colorado can tell from this angle. Mr. Stauber's working his phone there. His thumb is very nimble. Do you think he's playing Candy Crush or Minesweeper?
I again ask members to address the remarks to the chair.
Mr. Chairman, I will say it pains me. It pains me because, again, I have great respect for Mr. Stauber and for many of my friends on the other side of the aisle. And I have to imagine that they find this as absurd as I do. I mean, if we are left to, we're now in a position in which Republican colleagues are not allowed to say whether or not they support or oppose an amendment when they will be voting on that amendment a mere few minutes later. I don't think that's how craven this process has gotten. I don't understand. Mr. Chairman, how about this? I'll ask a question. Of course, I don't expect an answer, but was there a formal memo at all issued by Republican leadership in terms of how the hearing should proceed, of members being allowed to answer questions or not answer questions or say whether they support amendments or? Okay, well, you might consider, Yeah.
You gotta give him credit for just letting the fucking silence hang out there. That is painful shit. My God. Way to go, Joe.
It is weird. Like they don't have their own opinions anymore. They're just automatons.
It's marching orders. That's it.
Right.
All the way down.
All right, let's do our FAFO of the week.
A lot of these coming these days. This is President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Oh, you guys on it?
Do you regret the image of yourself posted on social media dressed as the Pope? What's next?
What's next? Yeah, even Trump is like, oh man, we fucked around and found out. Now I'm
woke Marxist Pope. I love woke Marxist Pope.
Oops. And finally, our gibberish of the week. Here's Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just casually saying that the Biden administration supported child sex trafficking.
Oh, of course. So we should just take his fucking word for it.
Have ended HHS as the role as the vector, the principal vector in this country for child trafficking. And during the Biden administration, HHS became a collaborator in child trafficking and for sex and for slavery. And we have ended that, and we're very aggressively going out and trying to find these children, 300,000 children that were lost by the Biden administration.
What? This is as true as his fucking lie that vaccines cause autism. So there you go.
The Biden administration lost 300,000 kids to slavery and child. Okay, right.
That's like straight up QAnon, like brain-wormed internet bullshit. There's no evidence for that at all. You have a Secretary of Health and Human Services who is a brain-rotten conspiracy theorist just out there.
Literally brain-rotten.
Absolutely insane shit.
All right, let's get out of here.
3 more years of this, man. The Get More Smarter podcast is a production of ColoradoPolls.com and the Bighorn Company. Your hosts are me, Ian Silveri, and America's dad,
Jason Bain,
who managed to figure out how to engineer and produce this thing. Megan does the video. Thanks a lot, Megan. She does a lot of other stuff, too. Appreciate you. The phenomenal Breakmaster Cylinder made the theme song. Get your shots while you still can. Protect your trans kids, your autistic kids, your immigrant kids, and any other kids, probably from RFK Jr. Send us a message. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, a comment on Spotify, or reply to a post on Blue Sky. We might read it on the air. Don't you want to be famous? Subscribe to us on YouTube. Battle the trolls in the comment section. Also, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get the podcast. Rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you got more smarter, it helps a lot. Find us at getmoresmarter.com, where you can sign up for bonus content on the Substack. And I'm all caught up, baby. We did it. Please send all angry and non-angry rants to angerrants at getmoresmarter.com. Other stuff to Ian at getmoresmarter.com, and other stuff to Jason at getmoresmarter.com. Thanks to Seth Klamann for being our guest this week, and thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Oh, and go Nuggets.
Go Nuggies!